Hello, I'm Tim. Easter changed my life because I think it's true, because I think it really happened. I mean, one of the biggest questions we can ever ask, and people do ask, don't they, is there a God? How can we be sure? How can we know? Look, if Easter happened, then there's a God, and we know his name even. So end of story, stop the search. So did Easter happen? And what does Easter mean? Easter is the series of events that took place in Jerusalem about 2,000 years ago, where Jesus of Nazareth, who claimed to be the Christ, the Son of God, and indeed the one who would die in our place for our sins, that we could be saved and forgiven all of our sins, that he did indeed die, nailed to a cross just outside the city by the Roman authorities, but egged on by the local religious authorities. And amazingly, that on the third day afterwards, he rose again from the dead and ascended to heaven sometime later, and still lives and reigns in heaven. And that's a colossal claim. But of course, the Easter story isn't legend. We know that because we've got really, really early fragments of the New Testament documents dated to within, a generation of the originals being written. We know the originals were written within the same generation, the lifetimes of those people who were the eyewitnesses, often indeed written by eyewitnesses. And we also know that many of those eyewitnesses who wrote in the New Testament ended up being killed, executed for their beliefs. You don't go dying for a lie if you know it's a lie. So look, the evidence is very, very solid. So it might be a hoax, it might be made up, and it might be true, but it's definitely not legend. It's definitely not been, lost in the midst of times, because let's be honest, there wasn't that long a time between the events of Easter happening and them being written down. And if you like, frozen in history. So when you read the New Testament documents, you're basically reading some folks from the first century speaking directly to you today in 2021. They haven't been distorted over time, and we know that because we've almost got the originals. We've got very, 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 very early copies of those originals. So look, I didn't always think that. I was brought up by a lovely mum and dad. They split up when I was 4 or 5, just before I was 5, but they were really grown up about it. My mum sadly passed away 16 years ago. My dad is still thankfully with us. He's a great dad, even though we lived with our mum when we were young. We were brought up to have good values, I think, and to know the importance of being kind to other people and to take responsibility, to show generosity, to not judge people, and to look for the best in people. Also good values, but we weren't brought up to believe in God particularly, neither to disbelieve either, but not to believe. And I was brought up, I suppose, to be a sort of skeptical, questioning person who wouldn't fall very easily for, religious mumbo jumbo. When I was 18, my mum, who was a lecturer at Preston Poly as it was then, got seconded to Singapore, amazingly. And so it all ended up going pear-shaped. The college she went to work for collapsed, and she ended up back at what is now the University of Central Lancashire. But me and my sister went out with her for those first couple of months. It was really exciting. We got placed in a house that had been lived in by previous lecturers at the college who'd left some of their books behind. And these guys were Christians. And I ended up reading, not as my first choice, but only when I was bored stiff after a week, I ended up reading some of the books in that room that I was stuck in. And those books were, you call them prophecy, apologetics. And I went to Singapore as an 18-year-old, absolutely determined, well, certainly fairly confident in my mind, that if there was a God, it didn't really matter very much to me, and more likely there perhaps wasn't one at all. And that time I spent reading that literature that I just happened to have been put in the same room as, well, I'm afraid one night it just struck me with an almost physical force. Oh, flippin' heck, it's true. And if it's true, it's the most important thing in the world ever. And nothing even remotely compares. And I just want to encourage you to examine it for yourself, because it's mind-numbingly life-changing to know that there is a God, that he's almighty, and he loves you with such an absolute, amazing passion that he chose, not reluctantly, but with a kind of passionate abandon, to go to the cross and die for you. And if you think that's hard to believe, yeah, well, join the club. It wasn't the easiest for me to believe either. But sometimes you're struck by the amazing truth of something and you need to do something about it. So Easter changed my life, and I know for certain it can change yours.